Hello, and here I am again! Today, I'm going to be making a mask inspired by Foxlore to complement my last video about making my Coyote Stories cosplay. You know, I just gotta catch all the animal-themed albums, you know how it goes. Although there's going to be some overlapping elements between the two, I still try to challenge myself in this video by using different techniques to create the mask. But yeah, that's all for now, let's roll out. So first off, I start with 3D modeling the Foxlore mask using information I learned from KamuiCosplay's Blender videos. I go far more into the trials and tribulation of 3D modeling in my Coyote Stories video, because for this mask I actually started by modeling Coyote Stories and then I took the coyote mesh and used the sculpt tools to shape the mask into matching my front and side view drawing. This ended up saving so much time since I just needed to focus on making the mask look more mischievous by having sharper features and smiling crescent eyes, I guess. And with all this, my 3D model is done, so here's a little comparison between the Foxlore and Coyote masks. Now, I want to have a real-life foam mask and not just some funny pixels, so I have to UV unwrap the model. This means marking seams to create pieces that I think will lay flat, then numbering them and making dashes to show where they connect. It's kind of like making a 3D puzzle, honestly, because then I just print these pieces out onto paper and I can reconstruct the mask in real life. So initially, when I printed out the pages, I made a paper mock-up and I was so scared the pattern wasn't gonna work or it'd be too big or something, but it actually was perfectly sized. So I barely had to make any adjustments. Thus, I glue all of my little paper pieces to my EVA foam and start cutting them out. This literally took 20 plays through the Foxlore album, but I eventually got all 50-ish pieces cut out and started gluing. There's not a single ounce of contact cement to be seen with me, so I just used my evil glue that instantly bonds skin and also made sure to wear a mask and have proper ventilation. While this footage plays, I just want to say that if you like this mask, you can get a PDF pattern of it completely for free. You know, if all that you have is the change that jingles in your pockets. I will say though, I did make a good amount of modifications to the pattern in order to get the shape I want, so it's not exactly for beginners if you want to end up with something like what I have. Specifically the cheeks and ears, I did modify a good bit to fit what I wanted. But if you do use it to make something, I would like to be credited somewhere, and of course I would love to see it, so tag me on my socials. And here's how the mask looks all glued together, and I wanted to reinforce the little gaps in the mask, so I used foam clay. It's got a sort of slime-like texture, and I spray it with a little bit of water and it smooths onto surfaces pretty well. Luckily, I'm not going to be painting the Foxlore mask unlike the Coyote Stories mask, so I'm not as worried about making the clay as smooth as possible. Once I let dry, I sand down all the edges created by the EVA foam. I also very carefully shape out the mouth because I kind of want Copernicus to have a little smirk with him. Now, before I start adding any fur or anything, I've got to make a plan of what I want to do. I decided to go with a typical red fox color palette. However, what I love about Copernicus's design is his cute little blue crown, which contrasts against his fur. So I decided to make blue his highlight color and evenly spread it around by making his eyes blue as well. I think they're already blue in the album cover, but it's a very pale shade of blue, so I don't know. I can't really have as many facial details as the coyote design because I'm using fur, so instead I'm gonna add embellishments through jewelry and chains. I personally think Copernicus is a gold girly, so I gave him these gold dangling chains and earrings. He's also got eyeliner sharp enough to cut down that apple tree. Now it's time to make the eyes. One day I will actually buy the eye material fursuiters use, but for the time being I'm using a stretched out tights fabric and layering it with a clear plastic sheet. I trace the outline of the eyes, cut out a ring around it, and then stretch the fabric over it. Then I paint it black and interference blue, making sure to stain my desk and hands as much as possible. In the album art, Copernicus has rings for eyes, but I felt like they looked a little too much like piercing blue orbs, so I decided to make them more like a moon shape. This also helps him look like he's looking towards something and not just into the great beyond. I slapped some Velcro on to connect the mask to the eyes and make sure I can take them off, and the eyes are all done. Okay. Up to now, the Foxlore and Coyote mask processes are more or less the same, but here is where the paths diverge. Whilst the Coyote/Selene, which is what I wanted to name it, was painted, Copernicus will be furred. I start by making a duct tape dummy, which is what a lot of fursuiters use in order to create 2D shapes to transfer onto fabric. So I cover half the mask with saran wrap and then slap little pieces of duct tape on it, strangler fig style. It's really important that the duct tape lays flat on the model or else the pattern won't turn out good, so I especially focus on taping the inner ear, mouth, and eye. Just like UV unwrapping, I mark seams where I think the pieces will lay flat and then cut them out. I was actually considering felting the mask like a lot of Therian masks, but I watched a few tutorials and I actually did not understand. Cause like, how do you make the felt wrap around the shape if it's only in one piece? I know felting is really effective for painting, but I gotta stay with my furry heritage here and do it the duct tape way. Okay, so when it comes to fur colors, I unfortunately only have this brownish faux fur, cause story time, I went to Joann's, rip in peace, and they had a 2-yard minimum cut, so I was like, okay, I'll just have 2 yards of this very much not orange fur. Cause like I also wanted to use it for other things, but I'm thinking if I just use orange Rit dye, it will hopefully be orange enough. And if not, Copernicus is just gonna be a diverse fox because foxes come in many colors, not just orange. I pinned and traced the duct tape onto the fur, which is kind of like funky Tetris. However, I also want to keep in mind seam allowance and fur direction, so it's a little bit harder to do. For the white portions, I dyed some white fur cream because pure white isn't necessarily a natural animal color, and oh my god, Sphinx cats are more luscious than what I have going on here. The fur is so thin and is especially obvious when wet, and the backing is also like so loosely woven, I'm really scared to cut into it. However, if I brush the fur well, when dry, it sort of looks not too bad. And I'm gonna be so real, faux fur is expensive, so I'm just gonna have to work with this. Also guys, please remember to wear a mask, one of the dust filtration variety, when cutting your shaving fur. You can also use a spray bottle to keep little bits of it from flying everywhere. Regardless, I still got fur everywhere and it coated my clothes and phone and everything I touched, and it was great. Then I boiled the fur in Cheeto soup for a really long time, and the only thing that got dyed remotely orange was my hands. And unfortunately, I think I put the heat too high when dyeing the fur, so it honestly appears pretty damaged and not smooth anymore. So at this point, I decided it's either suck it up and continue with the damaged fur, or I have to recut the patterns with new fur. So I bit the bullet and snorted the gunpowder and wolfed down the magazine, which is just to say that I caved and brought actually orange fur, and it is so radioactive and I love it so much already. And I include detours like this just to say that the crafting and creation process isn't always linear. And to be real, your project wouldn't even be done cooking if you haven't had to redo at least one part. It's a feature, not a bug at this point, and maybe this is just cope, but we live and we learn. Oh, and remember, when you feel discouraged, Emily Peters Marco would not want you to give up, so you just can't go back. So I started to trace and recut all the fur, and honestly the process was pretty easy and only took a few hours. Then I send my last prayers to Margaret and Esther and start sewing all the pieces together. I always get really scared that the pattern won't fit the mask, but I really can't know how, it turns out, until I sew everything together. I generally try to machine sew because it's 10 times faster than hand sewing. However, when the pieces were small or finicky, I just had to hand sew it. I absolutely love hand sewing with fur because you can literally do any stitch you want and it will be completely swallowed up by the fur, so be as crooked / the cradle as you want. By the way, I know the fox is Copernicus, I've said it a million times, but I was thinking about it and it's such a peculiar name. I believe the most famous person with that name is Nicholas Copernicus, who suggested that the sun was in the middle of the solar system rather than the Earth. I feel like that's significant in some way, but the closest connection I can make is how in The Moon Will Sing, they quote-unquote center the sun in the middle of the singer's life. However, that song isn't even part of the Foxlore album, so if there are any crane theorists in the comments, I would love to get y'all's opinion. Okay, so I ended up with both halves here, and it sort of looks fox-like, I think. I then trimmed some of the seam excess because since this mask is EVA foam and not upholstery foam, any big bumps in the fabric will be pretty easy to feel. Then I glue the fur on, and here's how it looks. I fear it does look like an undefined mass of fluff because I have yet to shave it. Fur in animals has natural variation in length, and the general rule of thumb is that the closer it is to the nose and eyes, the shorter the fur is. And I'll be honest, I was not trusting the process while I was shaving, and I literally told myself, it's not like I've really promised anyone I would upload this video, so I totally could make it disappear because I was absolutely convinced the fox was gonna be so ugly. Just something about like the unshaved fur is just like But however, after a good amount of fur inhalation, here is how Copernicus looks, and he actually looks so normal. Thank God, I was so happy. but I felt like the edges of the fur near the eyes weren't super clean, so I decided that this diva needs eyeliner. And I mean, like the canon drawing of Copernicus basically does too, but it's like in a different style. I wanted to emphasize the sharp shape of the eyes, so I drew a paper mock-up and went with these little pointy things. Then I glued it on right where the fur starts and the foam ends. Now, I really feel like the fur lacked depth and detail, so I did decide to paint him a little bit. Personally, I feel like using acrylics on fur is a bit like the deal with the devil, and I mean, you don't want them to be after the both of us. And by that I mean, although your fur looks so good and realistic and beautiful when you paint it, it inevitably ends up being so crunchy because acrylics is literally just mixing bits of plastic with your fur. All that aside, I looked at Red Fox fur patterns and tried to copy it by shading the fur with brown and white, as well as brushing the fur often to break up the paint the best I could. Okay, now this is my favorite part. We are gonna bedazzle him. So I scrounged around like a little squirrel and I found so many pretty little things I could put on it. Pins, stars, eyes, OGs will know where these came from, and what have you. To start, I really wanted to make chains going off the corners of Copernicus's eyes, so I sewed on jump rings and used this basic gold chain. It was pretty easy. The only part you have to be careful with is securely attaching the chain to the eyes, because felt can be fragile if it's really thin. For the ears, I really wanted to give him some dangling chains like this one with a cute little teardrop at the end. In hindsight, I probably could have used hot glue, but I didn't, so I just hand sewed all the little chains on. Oh, and oh my gosh, I have these little star and moon avocado pins, and I thought it'd be so perfect for him. And at this point, the jewelry is all done. So I do want to have a little foxtail, and I literally just copied the pattern of this other tail I made previously and just cut out 2 mirrored sides. I then sewed it together and I stuffed it with fabric scraps because reuse, reduce, recycle. Now, who could possibly forget about Copernicus's crown? Not me, of course. I made a little paper template out of an absolutely empty page to make sure it fits his head, and I'm pretty sure in the canon it's a paper crown, but I'm scared if I do make it out of paper, it'll rip easily and he'll have to be the queen of nothing. So instead, predictable as always, I made the crown out of foam. I also cut out little foam rectangles to serve as tape and reinforce the crown seams. Like tape. I also wanted to make a bigger crown to stick on the tail, so I just repeated the same process but bigger. To paint the crown, I absolutely reused the blue from Coyote stories and did little bone and fire symbols. Literally 2 birds with 1 garden because it's a ribs and a curses reference. For the larger crown, I freehanded some more detail ribs which I really like and some swirls. I think this S shape is supposed to represent a plant growing, like in the garden or strangler fig, because I knew when I was painting it I had some sort of idea in mind, but I honestly actually forgot. Here's Copernicus with a crown, and he also has his other crown on the tail. Oh, and I almost forgot, I need to have some way of attaching the mask, so I used this random, probably chiffon fabric I had floating around, and glued it onto the side of the mask. Can you tell I'm just doing whatever at this point because I know full well this fabric is gonna start unraveling by the Crane Wives, and that is the wrong album. And with further ado, I am all done. Foxlore was literally about to be the ugly child, but I'm actually so happy with how it turned out. With all these things I've learned from my mask making, I'm actually hoping to make a similar one for my Ratsona, like this. Next video is gonna be something more chill, especially since Past Life has started. It's already turning me into a mad dog, and I've gotta get back on the animation grind. But that's all I have to say. Time for me to go skip around the garden. hello crane children, I fear we can't go back now because this concludes the end of my crane wives cosplays. I really do like how Copernicus turned out and I hope y'all did too. You know how this goes. If you like, you can like and subscribe, and I'll see y'all down the river. Bye bye!